The sound of gunfire echoed across the Montana plains, sharp and definitive against the vast silence. Jackson Blackwood tracked the fleeing horse thieves through his rifle sight, exhaling slowly as he squeezed the trigger. The first man fell immediately. The second managed another 20 yards before Jackson's second shot found its mark. The third rider, seeing his companions drop, abandoned their stolen horses and fled toward the horizon. Jackson lowered his Spencer carbine, a rare Model 1860 with brass frame and walnut stock, the same weapon he'd carried as a Union scout. Its familiar weight had saved his life more than once. He ran a weathered hand along its lever action, appreciating the precision engineering that allowed him to fire 7 rounds without reloading, an advantage that had just saved him 3 prize stallions worth more than most men earned in a year. His ranch, 500 acres of hard-won Montana soil, couldn't afford such losses. Not with winter approaching. Not with everything else he'd already lost. The Blackwood Ranch stood against the backdrop of pine-covered mountains, weathered but defiant. The main house, barn, and outbuildings showed signs of neglect, peeling paint, loose boards, a fence section collapsing under the weight of time and insufficient attention. Once, it had been the pride of the valley. Now it barely held together, much like the man who owned it. Jackson secured the horses in the corral, his movements efficient from years of practice. At 35, his face carried the hard lines of a man who'd seen too much: the Civil War, the death of his wife Catherine, the struggle to keep this land when everything conspired to take it away. His dark hair bore streaks of premature gray at the temples, and a scar ran along his jaw, a souvenir from Shiloh that he carried alongside less visible wounds. As dusk settled across the ranch, he spotted a figure approaching on foot. A woman, by the shape of her, walking with the hesitant steps of someone uncertain of her welcome. Jackson's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip. Trust came at a premium in the territories. "State your business," he called when she reached hearing distance, his voice rough from disuse. She stopped, clutching a small bundle to her side. Even in the fading light, Jackson could see she was young, mid-20s perhaps, with honey-brown hair tied back severely. Her dress, once decent quality, showed signs of hard travel. "I'm Sarah Sullivan," she replied, her voice steadier than her appearance suggested. "I heard in town you needed help with cooking and housekeeping." Jackson studied her with the calculating gaze of a man who'd learned to read people quickly or die. Her eyes held his without flinching, but something in them seemed hunted. "You heard wrong," he said flatly. "Can't afford help." "I don't require much payment," she countered. "Just room and board to start. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Blackwood." The fact she knew his name meant she'd asked about him in Silver Creek. The thought didn't sit well. "How'd you get out here? It's 10 miles from town." "I walked." Seeing his skeptical expression, she added, "I couldn't afford the stage fare, and I didn't want to attract attention asking for a ride." Jackson's eyes narrowed. Women didn't walk 10 miles alone through Montana territory unless they were running from something or someone. Before he could respond, the screen door of the main house creaked open. A small figure appeared, a girl of 5 with dark curls and solemn eyes too old for her face. "Papa," the child called tentatively. "Go back inside, Emma," Jackson instructed, his tone softening slightly. The woman, Sarah, glanced at the child, then back at Jackson. "Your daughter needs proper meals and a clean house," she said quietly. "I can provide that." Jackson hesitated, looking between his daughter and this stranger. The house had fallen into disarray since Catherine's death from fever 4 years ago. He managed the ranch. Barely. The domestic side had suffered. Emma had suffered. "You're here only to cook and clean," he finally said, his voice hard. "Don't think you're owed anything else. First sign of trouble, you're gone." Sarah nodded, relief briefly crossing her features before her expression returned to careful neutrality. "I understand, Mr. Blackwood." "Jackson," he corrected automatically. "Mr. Blackwood was my father." He led her inside, where the interior confirmed what the exterior had suggested: a home in decay. Dishes piled in the kitchen sink. Dust coated every surface. Clothes lay where they'd been dropped. Sarah surveyed the chaos without comment. but Jackson saw her shoulders straighten, as if preparing for battle. "Your room's in back," he said gruffly. "Breakfast at dawn. I expect dinner when I come in from the range." As he turned to leave, he caught Emma watching the newcomer with wary curiosity. It was the most interest she'd shown in anything for months. Old Emmett Carson spotted Sarah first thing the next morning as she hauled water from the well. The 68-year-old ranch foreman had weathered as many seasons as the mountains themselves, his leathery skin etched with a lifetime of sun and wind. He'd fought alongside Jackson's father in earlier conflicts and stayed to help raise the boy after Thomas Blackwood's brutal methods nearly broke his son. "So he finally hired help," Emmett observed, his gravelly voice startling Sarah. "About time. Place needs a woman's touch." Sarah straightened, water bucket in hand. "I'm Sarah Sullivan, the new housekeeper. Emmett Carson. I manage what's left of this ranch." His kind eyes assessed her worn appearance. "Jackson can be hard. Lost too much, too young." "I don't mind hard men, Mr. Carson, as long as they're fair." Something in her tone made Emmett look closer. "Everyone out here's running from something, Miss Sullivan. Just hope whatever's chasing you doesn't catch up." Sarah's knuckles whitened around the bucket handle. "I don't know what you mean." "Sheriff in town mentioned a woman running from her husband back east, fellow offering a reward." The bucket slipped from Sarah's suddenly nerveless fingers, water splashing across the dirt. Emmett pretended not to notice her trembling hands as she quickly knelt to retrieve it. "I should get back to work," she said, voice tight. "Miss Sullivan," Emmett called as she turned away. "Jackson doesn't ask questions about people's past, neither do I, but if trouble comes looking, best know which side you're standing on." By midday, Sarah had made remarkable progress. The kitchen gleamed, dishes were washed and stored, and the smell of baking bread filled the house for the first time in years. She worked with the fierce concentration of someone outrunning ghosts, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. When she rolled up her sleeves to tackle the hearth, Jackson entered unexpectedly. His eyes caught the pattern of faded bruises on her forearms, unmistakable finger marks pressed into pale skin. Sarah quickly tugged her sleeves down, but not before Jackson had seen enough. "There's a shotgun in the hall closet," he said matter-of-factly. "You know how to use one?" Sarah shook her head, surprised by the question. "I'll show you tonight. In the territories, everyone should be able to defend themselves." He hesitated, then added, "What happens on my land is my business. Nobody else's." The simple statement contained a promise of protection that Sarah hadn't expected. She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Later, Jackson found Sarah and Emma in the kitchen, making apple cake from an old recipe card in Catherine's handwriting. His daughter's small hands were covered in flour, a smile on her face that he hadn't seen since her mother died. "Papa," Emma called when she noticed him. "Miss Sarah is teaching me to bake like Mama did." Jackson stood frozen in the doorway, struck by the tableau of domestic normalcy that had vanished from his life 4 years ago. Sarah tensed, clearly unsure if she'd overstepped. "Your daughter has a natural talent," she said carefully. Jackson just nodded, his expression unreadable, before retreating to the barn where the familiar routine of caring for animals didn't threaten to crack the walls he'd built around his grief. That evening, true to his word, Jackson took Sarah behind the house and placed his shotgun in her hands. The weapon was heavy, intimidating. "This is a Winchester Model 1876, he explained. 10 gauge, it'll stop anything that needs stopping." He positioned himself behind her, adjusting her grip and stance with professional efficiency. "Keep it tight against your shoulder. The kick will bruise you otherwise." Sarah flinched when his hands touched her, a reaction she couldn't hide. Jackson stepped back immediately, giving her space. "Whoever marked your arms," he said quietly, "they come here. They'll answer to me." Sarah met his eyes, seeing not pity but a soldier's understanding of violence. "My husband," she admitted, the word bitter in her mouth. "Former husband, I hope, in St. Louis." Jackson nodded once. St. Louis is a long way from Montana. Let's keep it that way. He showed her how to load, aim, and fire the shotgun, his instruction clear and patient. Sarah proved a quick study, determination overcoming fear. By their third round of practice, she hit the can he'd set up 20 yards away. Good, Jackson said, approval evident in his tone. Again. As darkness fell and Emma was tucked safely in bed, Jackson invited Sarah to join him on the porch. Rain clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first real storm of fall. They sat in silence, watching lightning flash in the distance. I was a Union scout during the war, Jackson said finally, surprising Sarah with the personal revelation. Learned to track, to read people, to survive. Came back to find my father had nearly run this place into the ground. Was he a difficult man? Sarah asked, sensing deeper currents. Jackson's laugh held no humor. Thomas Blackwood believed the only way to raise a son was with a firm hand and a leather strap. Thought weakness was a sin worse than murder. The simple statement explained much about Jackson's hardened exterior. Sarah found herself sharing in return. My father was a farmer in Ohio, kind, gentle. When Richard Matthews came from St. Louis to buy crops, he seemed so sophisticated, so charming. My parents thought he was my chance for a better life. Some better lives come with hidden costs, Jackson observed. Yes. Sarah stared into the gathering darkness. The first time he hit me was 6 months after our wedding, when I embarrassed him at a business dinner. He apologized so beautifully afterward. I believed him. They always apologize, Jackson said, his voice hard with knowledge that made Sarah wonder what else he'd seen during the war. Until they don't. A crack of thunder punctuated his words, and rain began to fall in earnest. They remained on the porch, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding. Jackson's first indication of trouble came 3 weeks later when he rode into Silver Creek for supplies. The town had grown since the railroad survey teams marked it as a future stop on the Northern Pacific Line. A single dusty street now boasted a general store, saloon, small church, doctor's office, and sheriff's department. Sheriff Thomas Miller hailed Jackson as he tied his horse outside the general store. Miller was a fair man who'd come west after serving as a Union officer. Until recently, he'd doubled as the town's doctor, but the growing community had finally attracted a proper physician last spring. Blackwood, Miller greeted him with a nod. Heard you hired help out at the ranch. Jackson's eyes narrowed. News travels fast. Small town. Miller studied him. Young woman, came through asking about work. Some men have been asking about her since, well-dressed types from back east. Pinkerton Detectives? Jackson asked, referring to the famous or infamous agency that specialized in tracking fugitives. Miller nodded. Didn't say as much, but they had the look. Mentioned a woman matching your housekeeper's description. Said her name was Elizabeth Matthews, husband looking for her. Jackson kept his expression neutral. My housekeeper's name is Sarah Sullivan. The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his vest, opening it to reveal a drawing of Sarah's face beneath the name Elizabeth Matthews. That's so. Miller raised an eyebrow. Well, names change easy out here. Just thought you should know. As Jackson collected supplies, he spotted Martha Johnson across the street, his late wife's sister-in-law. She had Emma by the hand, leading her from the schoolhouse where Martha taught. The arrangement had been Martha's suggestion after Catherine died. Emma would stay in town during the week for schooling, returning to the ranch on weekends. Martha spotted him and approached, her expression pinched with perpetual disapproval. At 55, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed propriety was next to godliness. Jackson, she greeted him coolly, I wasn't expecting you until Friday. Needed supplies, he replied, crouching to Emma's level. Hello, kitten. Emma's solemn face brightened. Papa, Miss Sarah made me a new dress. Can I wear it to church on Sunday? Martha's expression tightened further. Yes, I heard you hired help. A young, unmarried woman living under your roof has caused quite a stir, Jackson. People talk. Jackson straightened, his jaw hardening. Let them. My business is my own. And Emma, is she your business too? Because I'm concerned about the example. Emma comes home with me today, Jackson interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Send word to the school. Martha's shock was evident. But it's the middle of the week. Emma, Jackson said, ignoring Martha's protests. Go ask Mr. Davis for some candy while I finish talking to your aunt. When Emma was out of earshot, Jackson fixed Martha with a cold stare. 4 years you've been trying to take her from me, using school as an excuse to keep her in town longer each time. It stops now. I'm only thinking of Emma's welfare, Martha insisted. A child needs proper feminine influence, not some drifter you've taken in. Miss Sullivan is a decent woman who's brought more life back to Emma in 3 weeks than you have in 4 years. My daughter stays with me from now on. I'll bring her to school mornings and collect her afternoons. Martha's face flushed with anger. Catherine would never— Don't, Jackson warned, his voice dropping dangerously. Don't use her name to manipulate me. Catherine knew what kind of man I am. She trusted me to protect our daughter. That's exactly what I'm doing. He collected Emma and their supplies, leaving Martha seething on the boardwalk. As they rode home, Emma chattered excitedly about returning to the ranch, asking if Sarah would teach her more baking. Jackson listened, his mind on Sheriff Miller's warning and the wanted poster. Men looking for Sarah meant trouble coming. He'd prepare accordingly. The church social in early October brought the entire community together in the churchyard. Tables laden with food, children playing games, men discussing cattle prices and weather predictions, a rare day of leisure in the hard-working community. Sarah had initially declined to attend, conscious of her precarious position. But Emma's pleading and Jackson's gruff, "People might as well get used to seeing you," had convinced her. She wore a new dress made from blue calico Jackson had brought from town, her hair arranged in a softer style than her usual severe knot. The transformation wasn't lost on the townspeople, who watched with undisguised curiosity as Jackson Blackwood arrived with his daughter and the mysterious housekeeper who'd caused so much speculation. Emmett joined them, nodding approvingly at Sarah. You clean up nice, Miss Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. Carson. So do you. Sheriff Miller approached, introducing his wife and the town's new physician, Dr. Jonathan Thomas. Dr. Thomas took over my medical duties last spring, Miller explained. Finally let me focus on keeping the peace. Mrs. Miller has been eager to meet you, the sheriff continued. Not many new faces in Silver Creek? Mrs. Miller, a handsome woman in her 40s, smiled warmly. We're having a quilting circle next week. You'd be most welcome to join us. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the church entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of well-dressed strangers had arrived, 5 men in city clothes that stood out sharply against the more practical attire of the locals. Jackson's hand moved instinctively to Sarah's elbow, guiding her behind him as the leader of the newcomers surveyed the gathering. The man was handsome in a polished way, perhaps 40, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. That's him, Sarah whispered, her face draining of color. Richard. Jackson nodded once, scanning for Emmett, who had already noticed the situation and was moving Emma safely away. The sheriff watched with narrowed eyes, one hand resting near his sidearm. Richard Matthews spotted Sarah and smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. He approached with the casual confidence of a predator who's cornered its prey. Elizabeth, my dear, he called, using the name Sarah had abandoned. What a charming little town you found to hide in. The social fell silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. My name is Sarah Sullivan, she replied, her voice remarkably steady despite her pallor. I don't know any Elizabeth. Richard's pleasant expression never wavered. I apologize for my wife's confusion. She's been unwell. Dr. Lawrence in St. Louis has been treating her condition for years. He addressed the gathering at large. I've been searching for months. You can imagine my concern when she disappeared, taking family heirlooms and a considerable sum of money. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah shook her head. I took nothing that wasn't mine. Only my mother's wedding band and the small allowance I'd saved. Sheriff, Richard said, ignoring her, I have papers proving this woman is my lawful wife, Elizabeth Matthews. I'm requesting your assistance in returning her to my custody. Miller stepped forward. This is a church social, sir. Legal matters can wait for tomorrow. My office, 9 o'clock. I'm afraid this can't wait. Richard's tone hardened. My wife requires medication for her episodes. Without proper treatment, she becomes paranoid, fabricates stories of mistreatment. He reached into his coat, producing folded papers. I have documentation from reputable physicians. Forged, Sarah said, her composure cracking. The doctors are his friends, paid to say whatever he wants. Richard's eyes flashed with anger before he controlled his expression. You see, these delusions are precisely why she needs to come home with me for treatment. Jackson moved forward, placing himself firmly between Sarah and Richard. She's not going anywhere with you. And you are? Richard asked with exaggerated politeness. Jackson Blackwood. Miss Sullivan works for me. Ah, Richard smiled thinly. I see she's found another protector. How convenient for her particular talents. The crude implication hung in the air. Jackson's hands curled into fists, but he maintained his control, recognizing the deliberate provocation. Whatever she is to you is irrelevant, Richard continued. Legally, she belongs to me. Nobody belongs to anyone out here, Jackson replied, his voice deadly quiet. Laws different in the territories. Sheriff Miller intervened. Mr. Matthews, I'll need to verify these documents. In the meantime, Richard interrupted, I've brought Pinkerton agents who have the authority to take my wife into protective custody. He gestured to the men who'd accompanied him. I have a legal claim to her and any property she may have taken. Martha Johnson pushed through the crowd, her face tight with indignation. This is outrageous. You cannot simply appear and make demands. We have procedures, even in Montana. Richard's gaze swept dismissively over Martha. Madam, this doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when a stranger disrupts our community, Martha replied sharply. To everyone's surprise, she moved to stand beside Sarah. I may have had my doubts about Miss Sullivan, but she has been nothing but good for my niece. I won't see her harassed at a church function. Emma darted away from Emmett, running to Sarah's side. Don't let the bad man take you away, she cried, clinging to Sarah's skirts. Richard's pleasant mask slipped at the child's words. This is absurd. That woman is my wife, my property under the law. I don't care what sob story she's told these frontier rubes. She belongs to me. His outburst created a ripple of shock through the gathering. Several men moved closer to Jackson, a subtle show of support. Sheriff Miller stepped between the two factions. That's enough. Mr. Matthews, you and your men will come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll sort this out properly. Until then, I suggest you find accommodations at the hotel. And if I refuse, Richard challenged, then you'll spend the night in my jail for disturbing the peace, Miller replied evenly. Your choice. For a moment, it seemed Richard might escalate further, but a calculating look crossed his face. He nodded curtly. Very well. Tomorrow, then. As he turned to leave, he caught Sarah's eye. This isn't over, Elizabeth. Not by a long shot. The ride back to Blackwood Ranch passed in tense silence. Emma had fallen asleep against Sarah's side, exhausted from the emotional afternoon. As they approached the ranch, Jackson finally spoke. He won't stop, he said quietly. Men like him, they don't give up what they think is theirs. I know, Sarah replied. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door. I should leave before. No. Jackson's tone was final. Running won't solve this. He'll just follow. We face him. End it here. How? He has money, influence, proof of my supposed condition? We have something he doesn't. Jackson guided the wagon into the yard where Emmett waited, rifle in hand. People willing to stand for the truth. Martha Johnson defending you was just the beginning. As Jackson helped her down from the wagon, His hands lingered at her waist. I meant what I said about protecting what's on my land. That includes you now. The certainty in his voice gave Sarah her first real hope since fleeing St. Louis. The following morning, Jackson left Sarah and Emma at the ranch with Emmett, while he rode into town for the meeting at the sheriff's office. He carried his Spencer carbine visibly, a silent statement to anyone watching. Sheriff Miller's office was crowded when he arrived. Richard Matthews and two of his Pinkerton men occupied one side of the room. Dr. Thomas stood near the desk with a portfolio of papers. Martha Johnson sat primly on a chair by the window. "Where's my wife?" Richard demanded when Jackson entered. "Safe," Jackson replied flatly, taking position against the wall, arms crossed. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "I've reviewed your documents, Mr. Matthews. They appear to be in order. However, Dr. Thomas has raised some concerns." The doctor stepped forward. "As a physician, I find these diagnoses highly suspect. Female hysteria is a convenient label for women who don't behave as their husbands wish, and the treatments described here, restraints, isolation, cold water therapy, are medieval." "With all due respect," Richard said coldly, "you're a frontier doctor. These diagnoses come from St. Louis's finest medical minds." "I trained at Harvard before coming west," Dr. Thomas replied. "And I've seen the marks on Miss Sullivan's arms. Those weren't caused by self-harm, as your documents suggest." Richard's jaw tightened. Elizabeth has always been prone to dramatic gestures when denied her way. "Like this?" Martha interjected, unfolding a telegram. "I took the liberty of contacting Miss Sullivan's family in Ohio. They've been searching for their daughter since she disappeared from St. Louis. They report she never exhibited any signs of mental disturbance before her marriage." "Fabrications," Richard dismissed. "Clearly part of my wife's manipulation." "Or perhaps," Dr. Thomas suggested, "the manipulation is yours, Mr. Matthews. Territorial law recognizes a woman's right to divorce on grounds of cruelty. From what I've observed, Miss Sullivan has ample cause." Richard's pleasant facade cracked. "This is outrageous. You backwater simpletons presume to question legal documents, the word of a respected businessman." "We question what we see with our own eyes," Sheriff Miller interrupted. "And what I saw yesterday was a man who views his wife as property, not a person. That may fly in St. Louis society, but out here, we judge people by their actions." "Then judge this," Richard snapped, producing another document. "A warrant for Elizabeth Matthews' arrest for theft and fraud, signed by a St. Louis judge. Will you honor it, Sheriff? Or shall I telegraph the territorial governor about your selective enforcement of the law?" The threat hung in the air as Miller examined the warrant. "This appears legitimate," he admitted reluctantly. "I'll have to detain Miss Sullivan until Judge Harmon arrives next week." "Unacceptable," Jackson stated flatly. "She stays under my protection until the judge hears all sides." Richard's smile was triumphant. "You have no authority." "I'm deputizing him," Miller cut in, surprising everyone. "Jackson Blackwood will ensure Miss Sullivan appears for the hearing. She'll remain in his custody until then." "You can't do that," Richard protested. "Actually, I can, and considering the circumstances, I believe it's the safest arrangement for all parties." Jackson nodded his thanks to Miller. "When's the judge due?" "Tuesday next week. I suggest you all prepare your arguments carefully. Judge Harmon is a stickler for evidence, not emotion." Outside the sheriff's office, Richard intercepted Jackson. "You're making a serious mistake," he said quietly. "That woman belongs to me, and I will have her back, whatever it takes." "You're welcome to try," Jackson replied, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "But understand this, on my land, I'm the only law that matters. Come there uninvited, you won't leave." The cold certainty in his voice gave Richard pause. "You'd kill over a woman you barely know?" "I'd defend what's mine," Jackson corrected. "Something tells me you understand that concept all too well." The weekend passed intense vigilance at Blackwood Ranch. Jackson doubled the watch, keeping Emma close to the house while he and Emmett patrolled the boundaries of the property. Sarah threw herself into domestic tasks with fierce determination, as if creating order inside could somehow combat the chaos threatening from without. Saturday evening, Jackson found her in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with such force it seemed she might tear it apart. "Save some strength," he said quietly. "You'll need it." Sarah looked up, flour dusting her cheeks. "For what? Running again? Fighting a battle I can't win?" Jackson leaned against the doorframe. "You've been fighting longer than you know. Every day you survived with him. Every plan you made to escape. The miles you traveled to get here. You're stronger than you think, Sarah." The use of her chosen name, never Elizabeth, meant more than he could know. "What if he wins?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if the judge believes him?" Jackson crossed the kitchen, stopping before her. Slowly, telegraphing his movements, he reached out to brush flour from her cheek. "Then we leave, pack what we need and head west. Oregon, maybe, or California." "We?" Sarah repeated, her heart stuttering. "Emma needs you," he said simply. "And I—" He hesitated, unused to articulating feelings. "I've gotten accustomed to having you here." From Jackson Blackwood, it was practically a declaration. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold fear that had been her constant companion. "There's something you should know," she said, making a decision. "My real name is Sarah Elizabeth Sullivan. I never lied about that. And I only dropped Elizabeth because it was what he called me." Jackson nodded, accepting this truth as simply as he had accepted her presence in his home. "Sarah suits you better anyway." Sunday night, Emma was safely tucked in bed when Emmett burst into the house, his weathered face grim. "Riders coming, 6 men moving fast. One's Matthews." Jackson was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. "How far?" "Half-mile, maybe less." "They're not waiting for the judge," Sarah whispered, fear constricting her throat. "Get to the cellar," Jackson ordered. "Take Emma, lock yourselves in." "Jackson." "Now, Sarah. We don't have time to argue." As Sarah rushed to collect the sleeping Emma, Jackson and Emmett took positions. Jackson on the porch with his Spencer carbine, Emmett covering the back door with his shotgun. "Just like Antietam," Emmett muttered, checking his weapon, "outnumbered and outflanked." "We held the line then," Jackson reminded him. "We'll hold it now." The riders approached in the moonlight, spreading out to surround the ranch house. Richard Matthews led them, elegant even on horseback in the Montana night. "Blackwood," he called. "Send out my wife and there won't be trouble." "There's already trouble," Jackson replied calmly. 6 armed men on my land without invitation. "We have authority to search these premises," one of the Pinkertons announced. "Mr. Matthews has legal claim to his wife and any property she may have taken from him." "You have no authority here," Jackson countered. "This is Montana territory, not St. Louis. You want to search my home? You come back with a territorial judge and a proper warrant." Richard dismounted, his patience visibly fraying. "I've had enough of this. Elizabeth, I know you can hear me. Come out now and I'll be lenient. Hide, and you'll regret it, as will anyone helping you." "Last chance," Jackson warned. "Leave my property now." "Or what?" Richard taunted. "You'll shoot us all? Even you can't reload that fast." "Maybe not," a new voice interjected as Sheriff Miller emerged from the shadows, rifle raised. "But I can help even those odds." The Pinkerton agent frowned. "Sheriff? What are you doing here?" "Got word you boys were riding out to Blackwood's place. Thought I might come along, make sure everything stays peaceful." Miller positioned himself beside Jackson. "This is still Blackwood's property, and from what I can see, you men are armed and threatening his home. That doesn't sit right with me." "We have every legal right," the Pinkerton began. "Not without a warrant," Miller interrupted. "And last I checked, the judge won't be here until Tuesday, so unless you want to spend the night in my jail for trespassing and making threats, I suggest you gentlemen mount up and head back to town." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the distant call of a nighthawk. "This isn't over, Blackwood," Richard finally said. his voice cold with fury. Not by a long shot. It is for today, Jackson replied simply. As the riders retreated, Miller turned to Jackson. They'll be back, he warned. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Matthews isn't the type to give up easily. Neither am I, Jackson replied, eyes still tracking the departing riders. Thanks for the assistance, Sheriff. Miller nodded. Just doing my job. But I'd keep a close watch until the judge arrives. Men like that tend to take matters into their own hands when the law doesn't bend their way. After Miller left, Jackson descended to the root cellar where Sarah huddled with Emma in the darkness. The relief on her face when she saw him was a physical thing, bright even in the shadows. They're gone? She asked as he helped her up the short ladder. For now. His hand lingered at her waist, steadying her. Sheriff showed up, tipped the odds. Emma clung to Sarah, half asleep and frightened. The bad man didn't get you? No, sweet girl, Sarah assured her, smoothing her dark curls. Your father wouldn't let him. Jackson watched them, something shifting in his chest. The image before him, Sarah protecting his daughter, Emma trusting her completely, crystallized what he'd been unwilling to acknowledge. They had become a family, his family, and he would defend that with everything he possessed. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cool as Judge Harmon's arrival transformed the Silver Creek Town Hall into a makeshift courtroom. The entire community seemed present, divided in their loyalties but united in their hunger for drama. Richard Matthews sat confidently at one table, flanked by his lawyer, an aristocratic man brought in from Helena. Sarah, Jackson, and Dr. Thomas occupied the opposing table, with Emmett, Martha, and Emma seated directly behind them. Judge Harmon was a severe man with a thick gray beard and penetrating eyes that seemed to cut through pretense. He called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. We are here to address two matters, he announced, his voice resonant with authority. First, the petition for divorce filed on behalf of Sarah Elizabeth Sullivan Matthews from Richard Matthews on grounds of cruelty. Second, the warrant for Mrs. Matthews' arrest on charges of theft and fraud. We will hear testimony from both parties before rendering decisions on both matters. Richard's lawyer rose first, presenting his client as a devoted husband whose mentally fragile wife had fled during an episode of hysteria, taking family heirlooms and money with her. According to his narrative, Elizabeth had always been delicate, prone to imagining slights and injuries, requiring careful management for her own safety. Mr. Matthews has spent considerable resources searching for his wife, the lawyer concluded smoothly. Not out of anger, Your Honor, but out of genuine concern for her well-being. He asks only for the opportunity to provide her with the care and medical attention she so clearly needs. Throughout this presentation, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap, fighting against the familiar feeling of uncertainty that Richard had so carefully cultivated during their marriage. Was she remembering things correctly? Had his discipline truly been as severe as she recalled? When Dr. Thomas rose to speak, his approach was strikingly different. He began not with legal arguments, but by simply asking Sarah to roll up her sleeve. Your Honor, he said quietly, before we proceed with testimony, I would like the court to observe Exhibit A, the physical evidence of Mr. Matthews's careful management of his wife. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she complied, revealing the fading bruises that still marked her forearm. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Judge Harmon leaned forward to examine the evidence. These marks, Dr. Thomas continued, are consistent with someone having forcibly grabbed Mrs. Matthews and twisted her arm. As a physician, I can attest that they are not self-inflicted, nor are they the result of any accident. The judge's expression remained neutral, though his eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Sarah's arm. Are there other such evidences, Dr. Thomas? Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Matthews bears similar marks across her back and shoulders, which my wife has documented. We also have testimony from Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Carson, who observed these injuries when Mrs. Matthews first arrived at Blackwood Ranch. Richard's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection. These alleged injuries could have been sustained during Mrs. Matthews's journey west, or even inflicted by Mr. Blackwood himself. There is no proof that my client caused them. There is, when pattern and timing are considered, Dr. Thomas countered calmly. Mrs. Matthews will testify to a history of such injuries throughout her marriage, and several witnesses can attest to Mr. Matthews' violent temperament as displayed at the church social. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses, Martha describing the positive influence Sarah had on Emma, Emmett recounting the night Richard and his men threatened the ranch, Sheriff Miller testifying about Richard's behavior in town. Richard maintained a facade of patient concern throughout, shaking his head sadly at what he clearly wished to portray as misunderstandings. But Sarah could see the rage building behind his eyes, a familiar storm that had always preceded his worst outbursts. Finally, it was Sarah's turn to testify. As she took the stand, her legs felt weak beneath her. For a moment, she feared she might collapse. Then her eyes met Jackson's in the crowd, and the quiet strength in his gaze steadied her. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Harmon began, his tone neutral, "please tell the court in your own words why you left your husband and traveled to Montana Territory." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I left because I feared for my life, Your Honor. My husband." Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. "My husband had become increasingly violent over the course of our marriage. What began as verbal criticism escalated to pushing, then slapping, then worse. Can you be more specific?" The judge pressed gently. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to meet the judge's eyes rather than looking at Richard. "The night I fled, he had struck me repeatedly with his fists because dinner was served late. When I fell, he kicked me in the ribs. Then he threatened to kill me if I ever embarrassed him in front of his associates again." Her voice shook, but remained clear. It wasn't the first such threat. But something in his eyes that night made me believe it would be the last, that he would finally do it. When it was Richard's turn to testify, he was the picture of aggrieved righteousness. His testimony painted Sarah as a sheltered, naive girl who had struggled to adapt to the responsibilities of being a businessman's wife. "I have only ever wanted what was best for Elizabeth," he concluded with practiced sincerity. "She needs structure, guidance. Without it, her tendencies toward hysteria become unmanageable." "And these tendencies," Judge Harmon inquired, "did they exist before your marriage?" Richard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of questioning. "Her family mentioned some difficulties during her youth." "Interesting," the judge noted, "as we have a telegram from Sarah's father in Ohio stating no such thing. In fact, he describes his daughter as level-headed and the most reliable of my children. Would you care to explain this discrepancy?" Richard's composure cracked slightly. "Her father is hardly an objective witness, Your Honor." "Perhaps not," the judge agreed, "but neither, it seems, are you, Mr. Matthews." Jackson's testimony was brief but powerful. He described finding Sarah at the ranch, the evident signs of abuse, her fear and caution around men. He spoke of her hard work, her kindness to Emma, the positive change she had brought to both their lives. "I can't speak to what happened in their marriage," he concluded. "I can only tell you what I've seen with my own eyes. Sarah Sullivan is no hysteric. She's the strongest, most level-headed woman I've ever known. And if this court sends her back to that man," he pointed directly at Richard, "it won't just be doing her a grave injustice, it will be sending her to her death." After a recess to consider the testimony, Judge Harmon returned to deliver his ruling. The courtroom fell silent as he cleared his throat. "Montana Territory has very specific laws regarding marriage and divorce," he began. "Unlike some jurisdictions, we recognize a woman's right to divorce on grounds of cruelty. The evidence presented today, both physical and testimonial, leaves little doubt that such cruelty existed in the marriage of Richard and Sarah Matthews." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest as the judge continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Matthews's own behavior in this courtroom has demonstrated a temperament consistent with Mrs. Matthews' allegations. I find his claims regarding her mental state to be without merit and frankly disturbing in their transparent attempt to control and diminish her. Judge Harmon's gaze swept the courtroom before settling on Sarah. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that Sarah Elizabeth Matthews is granted a divorce on grounds of cruelty. She shall revert to her maiden name and retain full rights to any personal property currently in her possession. The judge turned his attention to the warrant. As for the charges of theft and fraud, I find them without merit. The warrant is dismissed. Mr. Matthews is hereby ordered to return to St. Louis and to have no further contact with Miss Sullivan. Any violation of this order will result in criminal charges. Richard's reaction was immediate and volatile. "This is an outrage," he shouted, lunging toward the judge's bench. "You cannot do this. She is my wife." Sheriff Miller moved quickly to intercept him, aided by 2 deputies. As they restrained the struggling man, Richard's gaze found Sarah, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think you've won? You've made a powerful enemy today, Elizabeth. You and your backwater protector both." "Remove him from my courtroom," Judge Harmon ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos, "and ensure that he leaves town today." Outside the courthouse, the town had erupted in impromptu celebration. News of the ruling had spread quickly, and it seemed everyone wanted to congratulate Sarah, shake her hand, pat her shoulder. The women who had testified on her behalf surrounded her protectively, while the men clapped Jackson on the back in approval. Emma darted through the crowd to throw her arms around Sarah's waist. "Does this mean you'll stay at the ranch with us forever and ever?" Sarah knelt to the child's level, smoothing her dark curls. "I don't know about forever," she said gently. "But yes, I'll be staying." "Good," Emma declared with a child's certainty. "Papa smiles more when you're there." 2 months later, winter had transformed Blackwood Ranch. Snow blanketed the repairs Jackson had made to fences and outbuildings. Inside, the house had never felt warmer or more like a home. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Emma build a snowman with Emmett's help. The girl laughed openly now, her solemn silence replaced by childish exuberance. Martha visited regularly, her initial disapproval having mellowed into reluctant acceptance, then genuine affection. Jackson entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Cold one today," he observed, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. He'd changed over these months, still reserved, still carrying the scars of his past, but the hard edges had softened slightly. "Letter came for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Ohio." Sarah accepted it with trembling fingers, recognizing her father's handwriting. After the trial, Jackson had helped her write to her family, explaining everything that had happened. Their reply meant more than she could express. "They want me to visit," she said after reading it, "to meet you and Emma." "We should go in spring," Jackson suggested, "when the pass is clear." "We?" Jackson set down his coffee, his expression unusually vulnerable. "I'm not good with words, Sarah. Never have been. But I need you to know something." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "When you came here, this place was just somewhere I existed. It wasn't living, not really, just surviving. You changed that. You brought life back to these walls, to Emma. To me." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I don't expect anything. You've just gotten free of one man. You don't need another making demands. But whatever you decide, however long you stay, you've made a difference here, to all of us." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. After years of being diminished, controlled, made to feel worthless, Jackson's simple acknowledgement of her value struck her to her core. "Thank you," she whispered. Through the window, they watched Emma laugh as her snowman's head tilted precariously. The scene embodied everything Sarah had never dared hope for: safety, joy, belonging. "I should help her before that snowman collapses," Jackson said, reluctantly releasing Sarah's hand. As he headed toward the door, Sarah called after him. "Jackson." He paused, looking back at her. "I'm glad I found my way here," she said simply. "To your ranch, to you and Emma." A slow smile transformed his face. softening the hard lines carved by grief and solitude. "So am I, Sarah," he replied. "So am I." Outside, the Montana winter stretched in all directions, harsh and beautiful. But within the walls of Blackwood Ranch, spring had already begun. The following morning brought an unexpected delivery, a letter addressed to Jackson, marked with the seal of the St. Louis Penitentiary. Jackson frowned, breaking the seal to find Richard Matthews' elegant handwriting inside. "Blackwood," it began without preamble. "You think you've won, but a man of my connections doesn't remain imprisoned for long. Courts can be persuaded, witnesses paid, charges dismissed. By spring, I'll be free. And when I am, I'll reclaim what's mine." The threat continued with cold precision, detailing how Matthews would destroy everything Jackson valued: the ranch, his reputation, even Emma's future. It ended with chilling finality. "You took what was mine, I'll take everything of yours, starting with her." Jackson's hands tightened on the paper, crumpling its edges. His first instinct was to shield Sarah from this new threat, to bear it alone, as he had so many burdens before. But their relationship had been built on hard truths, not comforting lies. He found Sarah in the barn, teaching Emma how to brush Thunder, his prized stallion. The sight, his daughter laughing as Sarah guided her small hands over the horse's gleaming coat, strengthened his resolve. This was what he would protect, whatever the cost. "Emma," he called softly. "Go help Emmett with the new calf. I need to speak with Miss Sullivan." When they were alone, he handed Sarah the letter without comment. He watched her face as she read, saw the color drain from her cheeks, then return as determination replaced fear. "He won't stop," she whispered, looking up. "Not ever." "No," Jackson agreed. "Men like him don't." Sarah squared her shoulders, a gesture he had come to admire. "What will you do?" "What do you mean?" "Will you send me away? To protect Emma and yourself?" Jackson moved closer, taking the letter and tossing it aside. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd abandon you to face him alone?" "It would be the sensible thing," Sarah replied, "the safe thing." "I've never much cared for sensible," Jackson said, his voice low and certain. "Or safe. And not when it comes to protecting what matters." He reached for his Spencer carbine, which hung on pegs near the barn door. The weapon had served him through war and peace, a constant companion in a changing world. He checked its action with practiced hands. "In spring, we'll go to Ohio as planned," he stated, the decision already made. "See your family. But we'll be ready if Matthews makes good on his threats." Sarah studied his face. "You're not afraid?" "Of him?" "No." Jackson returned the rifle to its place. "Of losing you and Emma, more than anything?" In that moment, something shifted between them, some final barrier falling away. Sarah stepped forward, closing the distance, and Jackson found himself drawing her into his arms. He held her with the gentleness of a man who knows his own strength, cradling rather than constraining. "Whatever comes," he murmured against her hair, "we face it together. That's what family does." Family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. "Is that what we are?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Jackson drew back slightly, meeting her eyes. "If you want it to be." Her answer was to rise on tiptoe, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held both promise and certainty. It was brief, almost shy, but it sealed a covenant stronger than any judge's ruling. When they parted, Jackson's smile held the sunrise. "I'll take that as a yes." In the days that followed, life at Blackwood Ranch continued its rhythm. Chores completed, meals shared, Emma's laughter filling spaces once hollow with silence. But beneath the ordinary routine ran a current of purpose. Jackson reinforced doors and windows, taught Sarah to shoot the Spencer with deadly accuracy, and made arrangements with Sheriff Miller for regular patrols past the property. They would not live in fear, but neither would they be unprepared. One evening, as snow fell in gentle persistence outside, Jackson sat at the kitchen table cleaning his collection of firearms. The Spencer, his Colt revolver, the Winchester shotgun. Each weapon represented security, the ability to protect what was precious. The metal gleamed in the lamplight as he worked, movements methodical and sure. Sarah watched him from across the table, her hands busy with mending. "My father was a pacifist," she said suddenly. "He believed violence solved nothing." Jackson's hands never paused in their work. "And you?" "I believed that too once." Her eyes met his. "But sometimes the world doesn't leave you a choice." Jackson nodded, understanding. "Out here, a man protects what's his. It's that simple." He slid the cleaned revolver into its holster. "Come spring, we'll see your family, and if Matthews makes good on his threats," his voice hardened with certainty, "he'll find we're ready." In that moment, with snow falling beyond the windows and warmth surrounding them within, the future stretched before them like the Montana prairie, vast and challenging but rich with promise. Whatever threats might come with the spring thaw, they would face them together. Jackson with his weathered strength, Sarah with her quiet courage, Emma with her renewed joy. For now, they had this: a home rebuilt from broken pieces, a family forged in adversity's fire, and the certainty that on this frontier, a justice would prevail, not through courts or laws alone, but through the unwavering conviction of those who stood for truth, whatever the cost. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines, carrying winter's last fury. But inside Blackwood Ranch, spring had already taken root, growing stronger with each passing day.